So welcome to this implementation deep dive webinar. So today we are going to be digging into the Avo developer tools, but first let's tell you who we are. Also, I want to do like a little workflow refresher for those that did not attend the Avo Basics webinar. This might be useful for you. And then Alex will take over and he will deep dive into the developer tools and do a show and tell of our different developer tools. So first off, I am Thora. I am leading customer success at Avo right now. My background is though in product analytics. So I've been in this space for a while now and am really familiar with the data and product side of it. But Alex is our engineering expert. So tell them a little bit about who you are, Alex.
Yeah, my name is Alex. I work at Avo as a developer advocate, and developer experience person. So I'm working on like all the code related things. And yeah, I would like to tell you about what we have today.
Perfect. And he has a really cute cat that you heard meowing in the background. It's really homey, really cute. Okay, so the Avo workflow, I'm going to walk you through that before we get started. So you might be familiar with this, or you might never have seen it before, but we'll walk through it anyways. So usually here you can see marked with 0, the first step into triggering analytics changes to be made, that is deciding product changes. So usually teams that are making changes to the product, they want to be able to measure the success of those changes. And then after that, Avo comes in. So these 4 steps here that are marked in pink, they indicate that these steps happen in Avo for customers or for people and teams that are using Avo. So the first step in Avo is to define metrics and event structures. So this happens in a branched workflow, which all engineers should be familiar with. So you create a branch in Avo, which is kind of your draft state where you can suggest metrics and event structures for your product changes. Then you can get feedback and request implementation on that branch. So there's a conversation that happens in context of the changes to the tracking plan, and you can request feedback for specific people or just request general feedback. You have this approval workflows and review workflows that are super handy for the tracking plan, because making changes to the tracking plan is a really big commitment, like with code. So you want a proper review, you want someone to take a look at it before you ship it. Then in this step, you can share and request implementation either with Avo, so you can just ping a developer and ask them to implement it with Avo, or a product person could actually manage their tracking plan in Avo and only share the implementation instructions with a developer in a different place. So for example, in Jira or Asana or Slack or something, we can just share text that is generated based on the tracking plan or the changes of the tracking plan, share that with a developer, and they can implement using either the Avo functions, which are the way to implement with Avo, or just however you used to implement before. And Alex will be digging into this here, which is the developer instructions. Then once everyone is aligned and everyone is happy with the suggested changes and you are using the Avo functions, then a developer would come in, pull the generated code based on the tracking plan changes that were made in Avo. So they would pull this code and use the type safe Avo functions to implement the events. And with the Avo function, you get type safety, and you avoid having to type a bunch of strings, which lead to a lot of spelling mistakes often. Then the 4th step is to verify the implementation. Alex is going to share with you the ways to do that. So we have this web debugger and mobile debugger, which is real-time and immediate feedback on the implementation and tells you if you did it correctly or according to the specs or not. And then we also have the inspector, and Alex will share with you how to set it up and how that all works. Then, the final step happens outside of Avo, and that is analyzing the data in your analytics tool. I forgot to mention in the beginning, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to drop any questions in the Q&A section that should be down there in your Zoom controls. We would really appreciate it if you would ask a bunch of questions. All right. So over to you, Alex.
Great, thank you. I'm going to share my screen and now, yeah, let's, yeah, I would like to use this opportunity to introduce our new docs. So we've worked on the developer journeys and like user journeys and tried to cover them in our new landing page. So basically, here we have a column for developers, and we will go through this column to learn everything about Avo. Yeah, but let's look briefly on what we have. Implementation instructions is like a description of what needs to be done, like Thora just mentioned. Then you can listen to the changes of your tracking plan with webhook. Then we have inspector that helps you to verify your implementation and compare it with your actual plan tracking. And then we have our functions, and this is basically the implementation workflow. So Avo does implementation for you. Let's go through each of them like one by one. Yeah, and we now divide Avo into 3 adoption steps. And on the first step, there is no engineering required. So you can use Avo without adding a single line of code to your products. And in this scenario, you would be able to share implementation instructions with the developer, like you've or someone on your team has created new tracking or new events to track. And then they would share something like that with the developers, where the developers can pick their platform, for example, web, and then they would see like what events needs to be added or changed or whatever. So this is the implementation diff, as we call it. And at this point, you can just use Avo like that without any code. But of course, you can do more with code. And let's go to the second step. And here it starts to be interesting. You will be able to monitor your actual implementation. Like in the Avo workspace, you would know what events were actually implemented and what events were implemented with errors, for example. But before going into that, let's look into this step. That's the webhook. It's kind of between these 2 layers. And you can set up your webhook. Let's look actually in the Avo UI. So here in publishing, you can set up a webhook. Like add integration, you pick a webhook, get a name, and then you will see something like that. Here you would add your endpoint where you would listen, and then you can, for example, choose what source are you interested in. For example, here we are listening to the changes in the tracking plan for our iOS Swift source. And every time, like here, every time branch is merged into the main branch, we get the callback. And the only request here is to return 200 status if you received the payload. Here we have the example of the payload. Yeah, and that's yeah. And then we are moving into the one of two main parts of our regarding implementation. And this one is inspector. So at this point, at this adoption step, you would need to add an SDK to your apps, but that's all you need to do. So basically, in the same way as you add like amplitude or segment, you would need to add our inspector, and then the SDK would do everything for you from that point. Yeah, so here we have how it works. So basically, you initialize the inspector. Then the main idea that it does is it takes your tracking call and it extracts the schema from it. We don't track any actual data. We only track the types of your data. So we know what's how your tracking is implemented, but we don't know what's tracked. So you don't need to worry about that. Yeah, let's look at how it's implemented now. First of all, you would need to get the API key. And the API key is here. You go to inspect sources, then you pick your source. For example, we will look at Android Kotlin. This one. Yes. Here is our API key. We can copy it. And here you can also see the how to include your the SDK into your project. We use like popular methods to distribute libraries. Like here we host in Jetpack, and you add a Gradle dependency. For example, in for iOS we host at CocoaPods, and for web we use npm. So let's start with this, and then we can also see that this is how we initialize inspector, and this is how we track things. If you go to a project, we can see that first of all, let's look at that it's actually included here somewhere, right? Yes, here it is. Android our inspector, and by the way, it's open source, and you can find the source code in our GitHub account, our HQ. Then we just include it. So on Android, we include import our inspector and the environment type. Then we just create and initialize it. Here is our API key that we just copied. Then this is Android specific, and then we provide environment. Environment, we have 3 environments: production, development, and staging. And this is very similar to all other platforms. Like let's see, here in the docs we have you can go just from the front page, the SDK reference, and here you would be able to pick your platform. Currently we support this 5, and so basically if we check web, see that quick start guides are in GitHub. Here is our repo, and here's how it looks in web, for example. As you can see, it's very similar to what we have here. On web, you would need to provide version and app name. On mobile, we just fetch it from your build file. So for now, we are interested in this line. And then, so we, at this point, we've initialized inspector. And the next we need to, next we need to call or send data to it. Actually, it should be just here. Press something. Oh, no. Changes. Yes. It's here. Nice. So for example, so inspector is designed in the way so it's very similar to other analytics SDKs. Like for example, if you are using segment or amplitude or something else, you have this track method, and you probably have some central method that you call everywhere, and then this method routes the events and event parameters to your destinations. For example, here we have segment, my database, and in the same place, you would place the inspector call and give it the event parameters, the same event parameters you send to your analytics destination. It will change them under the hood into the event shape, and it will remove all the data. You can check how it works, and it actually returns the unwrapped schema. Yeah, so this is how inspector works and how it's designed to be used. Yeah, let's see what else do we have here in the docs. We're missing something maybe. Yeah, okay, yeah, let's look at them about the debuggers briefly. Let's probably run this. I hope it works. I already have it here. Yeah, so this is our like little app. Oh, okay, built. Nice. Yeah, so this is like a simple app that has one button. This one button sends actually 3 events, and this one, as you like, this is not part of our app. This is part of our inspector. This is our mobile debugger. It is shown in the development and staging, and it's not shown in production. On Android, we actually have a special build without this mobile debugger. And yeah, I can just show it to you probably here. Yeah, so here we have like debug inspector and production inspector. Yeah, like that. So the production inspector doesn't include this little thing, and it doesn't require any additional permissions, which is important on Android. Let's try to send an event now. And yeah, you can see that there are 6 new functions appear. And there are 6 things because we have 3 events, and each event is processed by both our functions and our inspector. Let's look what's inside. Here we get the schema part. This is name of our event. Test event with prop with the same name. This is just the name of our event. That's a bit long because it's our test workspace. And here we can see that, for example, it has this property of type string, this property of type null, and so on. And then we have actual event, and this is reported by our functions. We will look into it a little bit later, but here we can see the actual values. This will only be available if you use our functions, obviously, but because inspector doesn't know anything about your actual data. Yeah, so these things are available on mobile, and we have a web inspector, which is a little bit different. We will cover it later. So yeah. What's next? yeah, so this is the second adoption stage. At this point, our workspace would know what's actually happening in your code, and we will be able to provide you with warnings if something is not set up correctly, or if something is missing from what's planned, and so on. So at this point, like, you get a very powerful tool for managing your analytics already. But then we have the third step, right? And the third step is the most complex in terms of technology. At this point, Avo will generate a file with code based on your tracking plan. You would include this file into your project, and then you will use this file just like your own code to call methods from this file, and those methods would just handle analytics for you. Let's see. And yeah, so there are two ways to get the implementation file. That's the like more straightforward way, or like more that doesn't require any setup way, is here in the implement tab. You would see all your sources, and if you click here, yeah, it will generate the code for you, and you basically get our file. But we will look into a second option, which is using the CLI. We provide a CLI that will enable you to call commands in terminal and fetch code from our. Yeah, it's also distributed with npm. Then yeah, same thing here. For example, if we go to this article, we will see how to set up our CLI. And in addition to, yeah, and here, of course, yes, that's true. Let's now try to run it. And the terminal, yeah, let's just do this. Yeah, how do I clean it again? Let's create a new terminal. Just yeah, it's just on npm, so we can npm install the Avo. Then it will fetch the out. I think, yeah. Let's remove this for demo purposes. So currently I have a project without our JSON file in the root. So the CLI will think that it's just a fresh project in terms of Avo. And then we do our login. I think I'm already logged in. Let's see. Yeah. If you are not logged in, it will send you to avo.app, where you would sign in with your account, and then it will just pick it up here, which is pretty nice. And then we do Avo pull. If your project is not initialized, it will just it will go through the steps to initialize the project. We will pick this schema. Then one of the sources, we are looking at Android Kotlin. Then where would we put the generated file? We currently actually have this file here already, constructed Avo, but yeah, let's just put it somewhere. Since we are in Java, it's a little bit messy, but it's like this. Yeah, this one. Yeah, let's just do avo.kt. Oh no! Oh yeah, right, of course. Yeah, we are actually on a branch now, and we would like to pull from that exact branch, not from the main branch. To do this, you can go here and use this code snippet. They are like conveniently named available here. Let's do it like this again. Yeah, this is our test setup. It's a little bit too complex. Yeah, this one. Okay. Yeah, here it is. So we got 2 new files, right? Where is the other one? Go to the constructor analytics. Yeah, here it is. Our JSON. It's not still not here. But yeah, let's look into the our JSON file. This is a file that contains some setup for your our CLI. You don't need to change it, but you would add it to your Git index, so everyone has the same CLI setup. You just like keep it here. And then let's look at the actual generated file. And yeah, this is exactly the same file as this one. We can just remove it. And yeah, so here is our file. And 2 things, like as usual, we would need to initialize this, and then we would need to use it. Let's look at the initialization first. We go to this constructor Avo class or constructor Avo implementation. We can look into all the methods here, and we are interested in the constructor. There are a few constructors, and yeah, you can pick any of the, any one of those. Yeah, there are a lot of properties. Let's look at how it's actually initialized. First of all, we provide, like, these 2 are Android specific. Then we add the environment again, similar to inspector. And here we support 3 environments as well. At this particular project, there are only 2 available, but we have also staging. So 3 environments, same as inspector. Then we provide all the system properties. System properties are part of your tracking plan. So this part will vary from one tracking plan to other tracking plan. In our case, for example, let's see, if we go to our tracking plan and events, we go to the bottom here. Oh, so properties, and we see the system properties. We have 13 system properties in this schema, and here they are, and they are automatically added to your constructor. So these are all these properties as system properties. So you provide system properties when you initialize Avo, and those system properties are automatically added to all your events that you track in the future. Yes, some of them can be optional, as you can see, so you can provide now. Some of them are not required, are not optional. So, for example, this one is required. You have to provide true, or and so on. Those are like similar properties as for events. And then you would add a destination, custom destination. If you have custom destination set up here in the connections, here we see that on Android, we have the custom destination enabled. And since we have it enabled, we have to provide it here. Custom destination is like callback from Avo, where you can do anything. If, for example, you have an analytic destination that's not supported by our, that's not listed here when you do add destinations, you can use custom destination and just wire it with your, with any event-based analytics destination. For example, here we have this my check and lib, and each method that's provided in the custom destination would just call the analytic destination. So make would call it like init, log event would call track, set user properties would call set user properties, identify would call set user ID, and identify would call set user ID now, for example. Yeah, so you can do a lot with custom destinations, which is pretty nice. And then the last parameter, optional, but if you are using inspector already, you would pass it here, and it will automatically connect our functions and inspector. And actually, this is why we've seen the event here, these events. Let's look a little bit inside, maybe. Oh yeah, no, let's look to the method. And then, so this is part regarding the initialization. And then you would call the our functions. For example, here we call, yeah, this is the button I showed you earlier. And here we have three methods from our code. So those are three events. For example, this test empty event, it's an event described here in our check-in time. Yes, so this is it. It's doesn't have any event properties, but it automatically gets all the system properties, as you know. So it's a simple event. Let's see how it's implemented inside our. Here you would see that first of all we do some checks, like if you are not in production or you use you have the debugger enabled. So in production you would have to explicitly enable debugger. Then we would do some assertions, check that the parameters that you provided, in this case, the system properties that are set up now are as expected. For example, if we check this system property, required in system property, we might notice that it has some constraints. It is it should be between 0 and 20. And you can add different constraints here. Yeah. And if we go here, we can see that it actually checks that it's between 0 and 20. And if it's not, then we would have an error message. And yeah, then it will be shown in the debugger, or it will be printed out in the logs, or if you set a strict flag, it's one of the initialization flags actually, it will show throw an exception. And this is similar on all platforms. So this is the first step. Then we do login. You can provide a custom logger to intercept this if you don't want to see any logs, or if you want to log somehow differently, you can do it. Then the next step is actually inspector. If we provided the inspector in the constructor, like we did here, when we called when we call the constructor, or in some languages we have init our function, which does exactly the same, but it's just a different approach a little bit. And inspector will automatically get everything. So you don't need to manually do anything with inspector if you use it this way, unless is you do check-in outside of our functions. Basically, if you do check-in with our functions, with this generated code, with these methods like test empty event, inspector automatically picks everything up. But if you do just manual check-in outside, then you will still need to call the inspector method that we did here. Like this one, check schema from event. Yeah. So this is inspector part, and then we go through all the destinations, and we build the properties, and we call the log event. So we send those properties to this destination. Here we have multiple destinations, including the custom destination, and custom destination is actually the thing that we provided. So eventually, after everything is done inside in our file, we will end up here and do our own thing. Okay. So this was a simple empty method. Let's also look into the when the make method is called. Make method is called when we initialize. So it's actually yeah, somewhere in init. So here we initialize, and at some point we call this make method with the environment you provided. So you would be able to initialize your check-in for given environment. Then we also have these 3 additional methods. They are dependent on the event setup here. For example, if we take some event with user properties, some event. Yeah, maybe, wait, what? User, yes. With user properties, you can see that it's configured a little bit differently here. And the action is update user properties. So there are different actions. We've seen the log event action, then you can see you have a bunch of different actions. And yeah, in the custom destinations, we see these 3 and the user properties. So depending on the actions on the event, we get different codegen here. And, this method that's called, for example, test event. Yes, this one. It gets a lot of parameters and then does everything pretty much the same. But here, when it sends data to destinations, it uses different methods, set user properties, because these are the user properties. Yeah, these are user properties. And all the destinations get this called. And you end up in this method. And the same goes for identify and identify. We also support page and revenue. Yeah. So this is how you actually use our function to track things. Okay, what's next? Yeah, and here you can read a little bit more about how it's implemented under the hood, like what's happening inside the initialization in init function and constructor and in the other functions. So yeah, and in the I wanted to also show you a little bit here in the Avo Inspector SDK. You can also read about batching, and for example, if you are using segment, it's very easy to set up an inspector. Yeah, so we went through this first step, second step, and now now we've covered the third step. The the web debugger is very similar to the mobile debugger. It's just on the web. It's on the third step currently because it's connected to our functions, not the inspector. We are going to change it, but for now it's like a little bit later in the workflow. Then then you can look at what programming languages Avo functions currently support and platforms. Examples of the custom destinations for all the platforms and languages we provide. Then, and a little bit more about the methods, callback methods. And then you can also control logs. One more thing I wanted to show you is implementation status checkbox. For example, if you go here, and here you would see all your events and which events were ever triggered by your development Avo functions. For example, as I showed you earlier, these 3 were triggered like 23 minutes ago when I pressed that button on the emulator. Test empty event, test layout, and those 2 additional events. We are actually going to improve this and make it more powerful very soon. But currently you can easily verify that these like 3 events were actually sent from your code, and all other events were not sent from your code right now. So you would have to go and check why are they not yet implemented before merging the branch. And all the work is happening on branches, by the way. So basically, when you create this branch, there is some different diff. Here, I just remove the Firebase source, so it's quite minimal. But ideally, you would have to implement everything here before you merge the branch, which is like here. And here we provide additional guides for different use cases. And as you can see, this icon is marks content for data managers, and this icon marks content for developers. Let's summarize. We have these 3 adoption steps, and on each step, you can use Avo as a powerful tool for your analytics. On the first step, you would be able to plan everything in Avo and not change anything in your existing code. So you would just keep your code as is and your analytics implementation workflows as they are, and just use Avo instead of your spreadsheet, for example, to plan and work on your check-in. And then when the new check-in is done, you would use this implementation instructions, just open, copy them, send to someone who would be implemented. And the instructions are designed around events. So it's really handy for implementation, because when you are implementing, you are working with events, and when you are planning, you are working on with maybe metrics, and metrics doesn't make much sense on the level of code. So here you would get it's a events diff, and it would be really easy to understand what events need to be changed, what need to be added or removed. Then then we provide a webhook. Webhook is useful to monitor changes in your check-in plan. You can monitor even a single event or a single source or a single destination, and do whatever you want when your check-in plan changes. Then, yeah, let's go through. Let's go like this first. The inspector. Yeah, when you integrate inspector into your apps, you would know how your tracking implementation looks actually, and how it compares to your planned tracking plan. On this example, we can, for example, see that there are a few issues. Then you will be able to understand what's wrong and fix everything so you can trust the data. Another nice feature is that you can connect these issues to Slack. So when a new issue is found, you would be notified in Slack automatically. Then the debuggers, when you implement the inspector, you would get the debuggers on some platforms. On other platforms, you would need to just add a few lines of code to get the debuggers, and they are really nice to check what's happening in your code and in your app in real time and visually. If you are using JavaScript, for example, and something is wrong, and we cannot catch it on the compile time, the Avo functions, we would be able to show you that something is wrong. And with inspector, you would just know that everything's working and the events are going out. And eventually, the last step is using the generated code. Like here, you can see that this generated code, it provides auto-completion, which is really nice. And all the function names are strongly checked. So you are not doing the typos or things like that. And that means way fewer database. Yeah, actually, talking about this, I've recalled one more feature I wanted to show you in code. So when we work with our functions like this, we can also do another way. So instead of calling a function that's named the same way as the event, we can also use this track method. So basically, we would do our.track, and we would have this best empty event. Yeah. What's? Oh yeah. Yeah, just like this. So this is not the most powerful example. This one, for example, has a parameter. And if you have an event with a lot of parameters, you would be able to create this object somewhere and then pass it around and reach it or change some of the parameters here and there. And then eventually, when you build it, you send it to your tracker. It's useful for like big, complex code bases. Yeah. So yeah, I guess that's it, right? Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Alex. Please feel free to drop any questions in the Q&A still, or join our community Slack. It's called The Right Track, and then you can have really good access to us if you join a channel there called Avo Code, right, Alex?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you can then ask any questions that you have about the implementation there in the Avo Code channel and the Right Track Slack. I can share that with you afterwards. I'm going to email you with both the slides that we went through here, and also how you can join that. And also we'll share with you the training page that you can monitor future trainings, and also take a look at the recordings of the past ones. Yes, and in addition, you will receive our email addresses, so you can email us if you prefer that way with instead of joining the right Slack track. I think that's it. Right, Alex?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you all for attending. Thank you, Alex, for walking us through this. This was really great and really helpful for, I assume, some people that are getting started with Avo. So yeah, I think I will end this webinar now. Bye-bye.